President John Adams appointed William Marbury as Justice of the Peace, as well as other midnight judges in the final hours of presidency, but the new president, Thomas Jefferson, and Secretary of State James Madison prevented Marbury from taking office by refusing to deliver his commission. The Supreme Court decided that although Marbury was entitled to his position, Madison could not be forced to deliver the commission. Marbury's position was not granted because the Judiciary Act of 1789 conflicted with the Constitution. Whether the Constitution conflicts with an act of the legislature, the act is invalid, which establishes the Supreme Court's power of judicial review.
In 1816, Congress created the Second Bank of the United States. In 1818, the state of Maryland passed legislation to impose taxes on the bank. James McCulloch, the cashier of the bank, refused to pay the tax. There was a unanimous decision for McCulloch that Maryland was not allowed to impose a tax on instruments of the national government, but Congress had the power to incorporate the bank. Congress has enumerated powers not explicitly stated in the Constitution, and supreme power over the states.
In 1890, a 7/8 white man named Homer Plessy sat down in a whites-only section of the train and was arrested when he refused to move to the blacks' car. This court case upheld the constitutionality of segregation based on the separate but equal doctrine. This ruling set the stage for race-restrictive legislation until its ideas were overturned in the Brown v. Board case.
Benjamin Gitlow, a socialist, was arrested for distributing copies of a left-wing manifesto that called for the establishment of socialism through violence. Gitlow was convicted for advocating the overthrow of the government by force. At his trial, Gitlow argued that since there wasn't actually any occurring violence because of the manifesto, he could not be convicted on his ideas. But the New York courts decided that anyone who advocated violent revolution violated the law. No state is allowed to deny First Amendment rights, but a state may forbid speech or publication if it causes danger to society. From this, all states must federalize the Bill of Rights and not forbid freedom of speech.
This case unified 4 different cases where African American minors had been denied admittance to certain public schools because of their race. They argued that such segregation violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, but were unsuccessful at first because of the precedent set by Plessy v. Ferguson. However, in the case arising from Delaware, the Supreme Court ruled that the African American students had to be admitted to the white public schools because of their higher quality facilities. The Supreme Court held that separate but equal facilities are unequal and violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment.
Dolray Mapp was convicted of possessing obscene materials after her home was illegally searched by police who were looking for a fugitive. She appealed her conviction on the basis of freedom of expression. The court brushed aside the First Amendment issue and declared that all evidence obtained by searches and seizures in the violation of the Fourth Amendment is inadmissible in state court.
The Board of Education for the State of New York authorized the recitation of a short prayer at the start of each school day, but the court said it was a violation of the Establishment Clause.
Clarence Gideon was charged in a Florida state court with felony, breaking and entering. When he appeared in court without a lawyer, Gideon requested that the court appoint one for him. According to Florida state law, however, an attorney may only be appointed to a defendant in capital cases, so the trial court did not appoint one. Gideon represented himself in trial. He was found guilty and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Gideon filed a habeas corpus petition to the Supreme Court and argued that the court's decision violated his constitutional right. The Supreme Court held that the framers of the Constitution backed the right of the accused to be defended. The court held that the state courts must appoint attorneys for defendants who could not afford one.
Miranda v. Arizona, there were 4 cases of guilty defendants. Each defendant was not made aware that their statements could be used against them. They had the right to remain silent, or they had the right to an attorney. This case established that suspects must be made aware of their rights before they are questioned by the police.
Jane Roe, a Texas resident, sought to terminate her pregnancy by abortion. At the time, Texas law prohibited abortions except to save the pregnant woman's life. After granting certiorari, the court heard arguments twice. The court held that a woman's right to an abortion fell within the right to privacy protected by the 14th Amendment. The decision gave a woman total authority and choice over the pregnancy during the first trimester, and restrictions for the second and third trimesters.
Gregory Johnson participated in a demonstration in Dallas where he burned an American flag. Johnson was charged with violating the Texas law that prohibits vandalizing respected objects. He was convicted and fined. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals overturned his conviction, saying that the state could not punish Johnson for burning the flag because the First Amendment protects his right of freedom of speech.
Alfonso Lopez carried a concealed weapon into his high school and was charged with violating the Gun-Free School Zones Act of 1990. Lopez was found guilty and sentenced to 6 months imprisonment and 2 years parole. However, in U.S. v. Lopez, the Gun-Free School Zones Act was declared unconstitutional because it exceeds Congress's power of legislating under the Commerce Clause. Gun possession in a school zone is not an economic activity that has a substantial effect on interstate commerce.